Okay.
You know, that's why it was
Say hi to everybody.
got read. I was like, sweet. So
Can you say hi?
store and I was just like,
Oh, she's shy.
we'll just put some fresh roses on top. I'm like,
So, Paul, what is swap meet about?
The swap meet is actually the preamble to a novel called Corpse Meditation. And I wrote the swap meet after I had begun work on the novel, got about 2/3 of the way through. And I wanted to reference a character in the story called named Jefferson Kitzler. Kitzler plays an important role in the novel. He kind of brings these two opposing worlds that are occluded from each other together haphazardly. And I wanted to kind of give reference to how each family, if you will, rather than world, had got to the point they were going and then in perpetuity evolving. So I wanted to give reference to him and how he had become this sort of figure that would get involved in something like that emerging. I just sat down one day and thought to myself about Jefferson and what in his life would have caused him to do that, and then the story kind of came out. And interestingly, it ended that the swap meet with linking to a character in the novel that just seemed really organic to get to that point at the end of the story. It ends kind of abruptly, the short story that is the preamble, but it worked really well. I was really happy. I really am happy with it. Now, if the rest of the novel works out like that, it'll be a good day.
Good. In writing the swap meet, which would you say came first in your writing, plot or character?
Character. Absolutely. I think character really drove the piece. It drives the novel because for me, I think it's all about the individual and the world they encompass and how they interact with the world at large. And out of an individual, you find plotline, you find the story, you find all of these canyons and mountains and ridges and hollers and caves. And for me, if you pit an entity, a character in their natural world, you will find it there. You will find everything you need.
If you had to recommend another story from And the Dead Cry Keeping Form, your book, what would it be?
Ooh, to put me on the spot. Recommend myself, wow. I would say the story would be Hunger. The story called Hunger. And it was born out of a piece of creative nonfiction, actually, by a writer named Michael Lessie back in the 90s. And it was a collection of newspaper articles from the late 19th century, early 20th century, alongside photographs from a photographer, I believe his name was Charles Van Schaik, between 1880 and 1910 in Wisconsin. And the name of the book is Wisconsin Death Trip. And it's basically about how Wisconsin, in its infancy, really came to be what it is now, and the ardor and the calamity that befell a lot of the families that were in that time. And Hunger fed really off of that. A man gets out of jail and is kind of thrown to the world, and he has to find his way, and it's very violent, and it's very unforgiving and unremitting. But to me, it felt natural because coming from that Wisconsin Death Trip, it isn't the organics of the country beginning after the forefathers, as it were, who slaughtered millions of tribes of Indians. It really showed that how this country formed, again, beyond the bloodshed that began it, when it was peopled by commoners, it really was nonetheless violent, as violent as it was before. So I don't know where the heraldic fairy tale begins, where mana and gold flow, but I haven't found it yet, in the history. But
what would you say differentiates Midwestern literature from the literature of other regions?
I know a lot of Midwestern writers, and I think what I would say is ubiquitous with us all is a more contemplative aspect to their writing, and I like to say our writing, because being from the Midwest and writers, we're therefore Midwestern writers, I hope. But I feel there's more of a contemplative feature to that aspect of writing. We talk about Toni Morrison. We've always talked about Toni Morrison, and I find that she is the epitome of that. Very contemplative, very still, very quiet. But even in her violence, even in her, more hard-edged writing or fossilized writing, that is deeply embedded. There's a quietude there, a quiescence that's really magical. There's a story from the Indian tribes around here. The Great Lakes are one body called Glooskap, and it ties all of this region, the individual states together, the theme, the intent, the marrow of this place. And I think that pretty much ties Midwestern writing, is that there is a rhythm to it. There's a beat to it, and everybody kind of feeds into it. And it's that quietude. It's that quiet country. It's that quiet black earth. It's that beautiful flora and fauna that is, intemperate and untouched. That really is a correlate to the writing, for me, that I've witnessed over the years. But that's what I would say. That's just me.
How do you think Midwestern literature contributes to American literature as a whole?
I'd be remiss to say that if our country was not replete with a lot of writers who, eschewing their nativity, where they're born, seem to be linked with a New York, or basically a New York, somehow. What's omitted from a lot of writers' histories is the small towns where they live, this and that, but it just focuses on their big-time living. And I think with writers like Hart Crane, he's known for being a New Yorker. He wrote The Bridge, about Brooklyn Bridge. As a poet, he's from Garrettsville, just down the road from us. I think what Midwestern literature does to American literature is it takes it back to what has happened in this life off the page. I think it is, to speak in modern terms, it is the world before Facebook. I think nothing in our culture the overreaching sentiment is, if it's not witnessed by somebody through a synthetic mode, be it a computer, basically that's about the only mode that there is, it's not legitimate. And if it happens off the page and nobody can like it or share it, then it doesn't really happen. I think Midwestern literature is that happens off the page. And I hope that it turns American literature into that sense of, these are the things that happen off the page. Here's what really builds this community of human and animal and plant and, element together. And these are the things that really, to me, matters, are those things that kind of happen outside this camera scope. But I'm here right now, so it's happening on the page, I guess. But what's gotten us here is what is so important, and putting us here together is so important. It's not sharing this moment, it's sharing everything.
If you had to choose one book that you consider an underrated book, what would that be, and why?
Oh, Feast of Snakes by Harry Crews. Crews was a Florida writer. Just passed away, I think, within the last year or two. I could be having my dates wrong. He led a really hard-boiled life. It was tough. And Feast of Snakes, for me, is the epitome of his work. It's about a failed life. It's about a small town living that, kind of ended with high school. And what happens to these characters after high school is basically an appendix. And it is really a traumatic story, a triumphantly, horribly sad, beautiful story that really doesn't get a lot of notoriety, maybe because of Harry Crews's lifestyle, maybe because he wasn't a New Yorker, I don't know. but it is a gorgeous, gorgeous book. It's called Feast of Snakes, and yeah, that's got to be the most underrated in my mind.